I'm just going to come right out. I have no idea what's going on or what this place is at all.
Hi! I am Princess Unikitty, and I welcome you all to Cloud Cuckoo Land!
So there's no signs or anything. How does anyone know what not to do?
Here in Cloud Cuckoo Land, there are no rules. There's no government, no babysitters, no bedtimes, no frowny faces, no bushy mustaches, and no negativity of any kind.
You just said the word no like 1,000 times.
And there's also no consistency.
I hate this place.
Any idea is a good idea, except the not happy ones. Those you push down deep inside where you'll never, ever, ever, ever find them.
If you have young kids, you've probably seen the Lego movie. If you don't have young kids and you've seen the Lego movie, we need to talk. That's another conversation. But there are always rules even when there aren't rules, right? We live in a world that's governed by rules. We live in a world where whether you like it or not, in every corner you go around, there's another rule to follow. There's something someone's telling you to do, even in your own home, right? Even the most relaxed among us, as parents or as a couple or a single individual without kids, it doesn't matter. You've got rules in your house. If your house is still standing and hasn't burned to the ground yet, there's at least one rule I know of in your house, right? So, I mean, we get it. We know that there's rules, but a lot of us get tripped up, particularly when it comes to the rules, when it comes to this idea of Christianity. How do the rules, how do the commands, how do all those things in the Bible, and if we're real about it, right, the Bible's full of rules. Now, it's not a rule book, but it is a book that has rules in it. And a lot of us, we kind of stop and say, wow, man, I'm getting the Jesus thing. I'm liking that. And I understand there's a need for some rules, right? We don't want to just totally hurt each other or anything, but what's with all the stuff? What's with all the rules? What's the deal here? How does this fit into this idea of being a Christian? Because we talked about last week, what you've heard it means to be a Christian is probably wrong. And if you're thinking, wow, I wasn't here last week, and that's kind of a shocking statement to hear, go online and listen, because we looked at what the Bible said last week. It really means to be a follower of Jesus. And again, it is usually not what our culture tells us, even a lot of times what we hear in church. And so sometimes we kind of, well, okay, if it's all about God's grace and it's all about being like Jesus and all these sorts of things that we talked about last week, then how do the rules fit into it? Because again, I can't help but notice this book is full of them. We started this series last week called Breakaway, where we just said, hey, we're going to spend the last few weeks here of summer talking about how do we break away, how do we break free from those mistakes, messes, and mindsets that hold us back in life. And I find one of the mindsets that actually causes a lot of the mistakes and messes we get ourselves into is a mindset that's wrong about the rules. Because again, there's so many reasons to kind of push back on them. There's so many reasons to reject them. We've all seen people who say, do this, don't do this, don't do it, but then they don't live by it themselves. And we call hypocrite, and then we say, well, maybe I don't want anything to do with this Christianity thing. There's that objection. Sometimes it's just, things are changing our society, our culture. Some things are starting to seem a little antiquated, outdated. What are the ones that we should continue to kind of hold on to? What are the ones that, maybe just are just better left in history and not part of how we function today, right? Some of us are really worried about being judgmental, and I get that. I'm right there too. So I think, oh gosh, I'm not sure if I want to really get serious about all the stuff in this book. Again, I like certain parts, but some of it just sounds way too out there. I think probably the biggest reason that some of us struggle with the rules, probably all of us struggle with the rules, it's because we just don't like being told what to do. And let's just be real. As human beings, there's something inside of us, something what the Bible would call our flesh, that we just say, you know what, I like to kind of call the own shots for my life. And we rebel and we push back and we don't want, let me decide what is right and wrong for me. Let me decide how I'm going to live my life. Don't tell me what to do. All the while, I think God is saying, you know what, these rules, these commands in my word, they are important. And you have to have the right mindset about them if you truly want to be able to break free from the mistakes and the messes and the junk that hold us back in life. And in order to do that, in order to really start to understand, well, what's with all the rules? I think you got to go back towards the beginning. You got to go back in the old part of the book, back to a time when this nation of Israel, God's chosen people, were in slavery in Egypt. And some of you know this story. If you're not a churchgoer, you don't consider yourself a Christian yet, you know something about this story, right? You saw a movie on TV, or you've heard the cliches out in the culture, or whatever the case may be. But just in case you're like, whoa, what is he talking about? There was a time in the Old Testament, in the old part of the Judaism's history, where a nation was starting to be born of these people called the Israelites. And it took place while they were slaves. Literally what happened is they had come into the land of Egypt kind of as refugees. This is how the whole story began. And all of a sudden they start to grow. And before they even realize, they're becoming a nation of people. And the Egyptians are looking at them and saying, wow, these Hebrews, these Israelites, they're getting big, they're getting strong. There's a lot of them now. They used to be just like a little clan of people. Now they're like this huge group of people. They're kind of becoming a nation. And it started to scare them, because we don't want them to be too powerful. We don't want them to start taking over. We don't want them to start calling the shots. And so the Egyptians decided we need to enslave these people. That's the only way to keep them under control, only way to maintain our power. So that's exactly what happened to the Israelites. But while they were slaves in Egypt for 400 years, the Bible tells us, something very unique, very interesting was happening. They were becoming a nation of people. Now, they were conceived long before that. It was giving birth to a nation, but they were conceived back with a guy named Abraham, when God said, Abraham, you're going to be the leader, the beginning of a chosen people, my chosen people. And he had a son named Isaac, and Isaac had a couple of sons named Jacob and Esau, and Jacob had 12 sons. And then again, and it's another whole story, and you can read about it in Genesis. It's a fascinating story. But all those 12 sons and their families end up in Egypt because there was a famine in their land back in Palestine. And that's the beginning of their story. And then they grow and they grow and they grow. They become slaves, but they continue to grow and grow and grow. And they truly become a nation. And then God steps in because of their oppression, because of the slavery they're now encountering, and says, I got to do something about this. I need to free these people. And he goes to a guy named Moses. Some of you know this story as well. He says, Moses, you're going to be my mouthpiece. You're going to lead these people out of their bondage of slavery, out into a new life, a new land that I'm going to give them. And in that exchange between God and Moses, there's a key thing that God says that most of us just skip right by when we look at this story. But it's absolutely key to understanding what it means, even back in the Old Testament, to having a relationship with God, and then how all the rules fit in. Because God was doing something here that had never been done before. God was doing something here that was completely unique to world history. And he wanted his people to understand what it really was all about. But here's what he says. Here's what he says. When he's talking about, most of us get caught up on, he spoke to him through a burning bush. A lot of us get caught up on, this is about to be where the Red Sea parts because Moses is going to lead them, or the plagues, or all this kind of stuff, right? And this little message, this little line from God to Moses so often gets skipped. Verse 7, Exodus chapter 3, the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. Okay, great. What's the next line? Keep going. I have indeed seen the misery of who? My people in Egypt. To which Moses might have thought, or you and I might think today, wait a second, your people, they're slaves. They have no form of government. They don't have any rules. Where have you been, God, in all this? What are you talking about? Your people. They're not, they're growing, they're becoming this nation, but how could they be your people yet? He says, no, these are my people. Moses needed to understand that's how it was to begin. That there was already a relationship. There was already something between the Israelites and God because God said so. Because God said, that's what I created them for. I created them to be my people. I've taken Abraham and Isaac and his sons on this journey for them to be my people. I've spoken into their life. I've guided them throughout world history to be my people. It doesn't matter that there's no government yet. It doesn't matter that there's really no traditions yet. It doesn't matter that there aren't any rules yet. They're my people. And then if you know the rest of the story, Moses, even though he was reluctant, Moses, even though he stuttered and couldn't speak clearly in front of crowds of people and all those sorts of things, Moses gives in and says, okay, God, I'll do whatever you say. And God uses Moses to lead the Israelites out of slavery, and they cross the Red Sea, and God leads them to a land in the desert where he calls Moses up a mountain and says, Moses, Now I want you to give my people some rules. In fact, it'd be the set of rules that every other command in the Bible would be based off of, Old Testament and New Testament. We know them as the 10 Commandments. But don't miss the order of how things happened. Moses, these are my people. I've seen their misery. Let's rescue them. Let's get them out of there. Let's take them into the land I have promised for them so we can start this nation that will be a shining light to the rest of the world, through which the Messiah one day would even come. And they go through all of that, and they come to this place where then finally God says, okay, now here are the rules. Let me paint it to you this way. Those of you who are parents, some of you have just gone through this. If you just recently had a baby, some of you it's been years ago, and you'd have to think back on it. But remember that time when your first child was born, or maybe you brought him home from the adoption agency, or whatever the case may be, and they're yours. And the awe and the wonder and the joy that fills your heart when you see them. It's absolutely life-changing, right? You're freaking out, but you're still joyful. You're scared, but it's like, man, I've never been this excited in my life. But what if when the doctor said, Mr. Urban, Mrs. Urban, here's your son, or here's your daughter? What if I responded by saying, no, not yet. No. See, here's the thing. They're cute. I get it, yeah. And I know he just came out of my wife, and that's kind of a big deal. But see, I haven't lived with this person yet. They don't know what the expectations are. I haven't even had a chance to give them my rules. How could they be mine? We would never do that. Utter lunacy to even think that. They're ours because they're ours. They're ours because that's just what it is. They're ours because they came from us. And regardless of the rules, regardless of the traditions, regardless of how our home works, they are our child. And the same thing was true of Israel. The same thing was true of anyone who would call upon God's name. You're mine because you're mine. And then once I bring you home from the hospital, once we kind of get things figured out, once you start to grow up a little bit and it's appropriate, I'll start to give you some rules. But it's not about the rules. You are my people. I've got a neighbor that I talk to him all the time. He's about my dad's age, and he's kind of the patriarch of the neighborhood, we call him. He's just a great guy. And he sort of takes us all in under his wings, and we talk sports, we talk traveling, just a great guy. But he's never really been interested in church, never really wanted to look into faith. And I was talking to him about it one day, and we got a great relationship, and I just said to him, I just really think you ought to come to church with me. I'd just love for you to come there and experience it and meet the people. And I know you're not sure what you believe yet, and that's cool, but I love you, and I love my church, and so I'd just love for you to come and be a part of it. And he said to me, Dave, I knew this day would come. I knew eventually you'd ask me. You know I was a pastor. I mean, again, we know each other well. Here's the thing. I'm not very good at being a Christian. And therefore, I just don't think I should go to church. And I knew, because I know this guy well enough, I knew exactly what he meant by that. What he was saying is, Dave, I'm not very good at the rules. I won't show up all the time. I don't get all the traditions. There's some things in the Bible I'm not sure I agree with. I'm just not good at being a Christian, so I don't think it's for me. And what God was teaching the Israelites all those years ago, and unfortunately what my neighbor has yet to learn, and I pray and hope someday he will, is that God's commands are never conditions to a relationship with him. God's commands are simply a confirmation of a relationship that already exists. Let me say that again. God's commands are confirmation of a relationship, not conditions to a relationship. There's so many of us in this world, maybe some of us who still come to church, wondering, I'm not sure I'm good at being a Christian. I'm not sure what's up with all the rules. And I just don't think God would accept me yet, or I'm not sure I want to be accepted yet if it is about the rules. And yet God the whole time says, oh my goodness, don't you understand? Don't you understand? Just like it was with my people so many thousands of years ago, nothing's changed. The rules, my commands, are always confirmation of a relationship, never conditions. to a relationship. Which leads us to another point when it comes to having a proper mindset about the rules. Well, what are they there for then? What are they there for then? If that's not what this whole thing is about, why are there so many rules? And why do churches talk so much about these rules? And why do I hear preachers on TV and you know, why does that seem like that's such a big deal of the Bible and church? What is the deal with the rules? Because we can understand, okay, good, awesome, grace. It's confirmation of a relationship, not conditions to relate. Okay, I get that, but what is really the point then? Well, lucky for us, there was a writer of the Bible who wrestled with the exact same question. In fact, he wrote most of the New Testament. It's a guy named Paul. And Paul, in one of his most famous letters, a book called Romans, stops in the middle of one of his sections and kind of asks the same question. Well, wait a second. If this is all about God's love for us, if this is all about what Jesus has done for us, what's with all the rules? What role do they really play in our life? Because Paul, if anyone knew it, Paul knew it. The rules are confirmation of a relationship. They're not conditioned to a relationship. That was Paul's whole message. Because that was completely flipped around in Judaism back then. That's what people were taught. You do the right things, God will accept you. You do the right things, God will love you. You do the right things, you'll be in God's good graces. If you don't, ooh boy, forget about it. Paul said, no. This whole thing about Jesus coming, dying for us, it shows that everything is based on God's grace for us. So what's up with the rules? Well, Paul, in part of his letter to the Romans, wrote this. Got it there, thanks. Verse 5, chapter 7. For when we were in the realm of the flesh, the sinful passions aroused by the law were at work in us, so that we bore fruit for death. That sounds a little wordy and maybe hard to understand. Basically what Paul's saying, when we were apart from God, when we wanted to live life our own way, when we didn't care about having a relationship with God, regardless of the rules or not, the rules, if we took them seriously, the rules, if we looked to them, were just a reminder that if it's about the rules, we're sunk. Because we can't live up to the rules. We can't do them perfectly. It's just not possible. And they were just a reminder of the fact that, you know what, we're separated from God and we're heading towards death. And that was true. So he says, in the realm of the flesh, the sinful passions, the stuff that tempts us, all the junk inside us, were aroused by the law, by the commands that were working us, so that we bore fruit for death. But now, by dying to what once bound us, we have been released from the law so that we serve in the new way of the Spirit and not in the old way of the written code. In other words, but that's not what things are based on anymore. We know that now. If we put our faith in Jesus, God's Spirit lives inside of us. That's what it's based on. And we're free from the law. We don't have to think that we have to be made right with God by following the rules. Absolutely not, because no one could ever do that. But Jesus came, and he died for us, and he gave us his Spirit, that if we put our trust in him, we'd be alive, we'd be free. We wouldn't be bound by those things. We would know that we're going to spend eternity with God in heaven when we die. So what's with the rules? Listen to what Paul says next. Verse 7. What shall we say then? Is the law sinful? Seriously, I mean, if it's all based on grace, what good is the law anyway? It might as well just be sin. Certainly not. Nevertheless, here's what I've learned, says Paul. I would not have known what sin was if it hadn't been for the rules, if it hadn't been for the law, if it hadn't been for all those commands that God gave us. In other words, God's commands, they're not rules to wrestle with. They're gifts to be received. God's commands are always gifts to be received, not rules to wrestle with. See, I've used the word rule up to this point in the message, but that's the wrong way to look at it. Rules are things we push back on. Rules are things we say, well, I'm going to, I'll do what I have to do, and I'll get away with what I can. I'll decide what works for me and what doesn't work for me. Rules just are, that's not who I am. It's just part of our flesh. But it's really not about rules with God. Every command he gives us is actually a gift to be received, not a rule to wrestle with. If you own a dog, you can appreciate this. Seriously, when you get a dog, you got to figure out a way to keep it safe. So you build a fence, or you put it on a leash, or you keep it inside, or whatever the case may be. And when that dog gets out, and your neighbor calls you and say, hey, your dog's in my yard, you don't say, not my dog, sorry, it's not in my yard, right? It's in your yard now, it's your dog. It's not how it works, right? It's your dog. The fence didn't make it your dog. The leash didn't make it your dog. The little doggy door that you keep latched didn't make your dog. Whatever. That's not what made it your dog. It's your dog because it's just your dog. But if it gets out, right, of the fence, if it gets out of the boundaries you give it, if it gets out from the walls that you've set up for it, whatever the case may be, something bad can happen. Something can get hurt. I know I've shared this story before, but it just bears repeating. When I was a kid, we had this little black dachshund that just thought our home was a prison, I guess. And it was good to be a dog in our house. You ate well, you slept wherever you wanted to sleep. Trust me, they had it good. But this dog, every chance it got, would just bolt for the door. And you always had to be so careful. Where's Kate? Where's Kate? Where's Kate? Where's Kate? Because you knew that. And then one day where's Kate? I don't know. And we're up on the deck and it overlooked the highway, which is about 150 yards from our house. And all of a sudden you see this little black blur like going in between cars down the highway. And we're like, oh my gosh, that's Kate. And sure enough, Kate got hit that day. And Kate never tried to escape again. She survived, but she never tried to escape again. But the fence, the gates, the doors, all those things were there to protect her, just like with your dog. The rules are no different for us. We look at them as, oh man, well, this one I like, this one I don't like. This one seems antiquated, this one, maybe that still applies. Yeah, this one's a little too judgmental for me, but this one I guess makes sense. And we wrestle with them, and we kind of make our own rules, and we kind of figure it out, and all the while God's saying, no, wait a second. My commands aren't rules for you to wrestle with. My commands are gifts for you to receive. Gifts to keep you safe, gifts to keep you strong and healthy, gifts to help you live the life that is truly life. There's a mindset there that we have to shift. There's a mindset there that has to change if we want to understand how the rules really work into who we are. You see this over and over again in our society. I'll just give you one example. I'm not going to beat a drum here or anything, but it's the one that I continually find in my face. And that's this whole topic of human sexuality. And there's so many different opinions. There's so many fights going on. And there's so many, well, this is right and this is wrong and all kinds of stuff. And basically, we've gotten to a place in our society where the only standard of what is okay and allowed is if there's consent. Everything else is just, well, you're being too judgmental. And yet the Bible speaks so much to sex and relationships, speaks so much to what is healthy for people's lives. And it's not because God's trying to ruin anyone's fun. It's not because God's a prude. It's because God cares about us so much that he says, here, look, I created this whole thing. I know how it works best. And I know that when you step outside of my design for it, you're going to get hurt. It doesn't matter what our culture thinks. It doesn't matter how we feel. There are certain things that will always take place when we step outside of God's design. Or another one that comes to my mind that as a pastor I deal with all the time with people is the issue of forgiveness. Do you know one of the commands we have in the Bible is to forgive every single time? Jesus says every time someone hurts you, every time someone offends you, you need to forgive them. To which a lot of people say, sorry. Most of the time, yeah, I could do that. Sometimes I can't. God tells us that because every time we don't forgive, bitterness builds in our heart. And the longer we don't forgive, it starts to spill out into our lives. And the longer we don't forgive, it eventually breaks relationships and puts us in the ditch. It's just a guarantee. It's just going to happen. Doesn't matter how we feel about it or not. Doesn't matter what our culture says or not. The command is there to protect us. The command is there to keep us safe. The command is there to help us live a life that is truly healthy and honoring to God. See, not only are God's commands always confirmation of a relationship, not conditions to a relationship, they're also gifts to be received, not rules to wrestle with. And just imagine, if we approached God's word, if we approached all these commands with that starting point. We may not get them all. We may still need to wrestle with some of them. We may need to pray through them. We may need to get some counsel on them. But what if we started with all the stuff you hear at church, all the stuff you read in the Bible if you go home and read it for yourself, and I certainly encourage you to do that. What if we started with this idea that these are gifts for my life, that God had a reason for putting them there? And if I would obey them, if I would figure out how to live according to them, I'm not trying to earn God's love, I'm not trying to earn his favor, but what would happen? What would happen if that's where we started with all the quote-unquote rules? How would our lives change? How would we be blessed? What kind of freedom would we experience in our lives? And there's something I want you to do this week as you think about what you've heard. It's pretty simple. Some of you already do this. But I want you to go home and read the Bible. In fact, read it at least a little bit every day, or continue to read it if you're already a Bible reader. And when you do, I want you to ask yourself a couple of questions. Whatever you read, if you start in the book of John, if you start in the book of Matthew, if you start in Romans like we talked about here today, it doesn't matter. You start in Genesis, go way back to the beginning, whatever it is, ask yourself a couple of questions. If you're in the Old Testament, for example, the first one, this is we're going from minor to major here, but if this is a command I read in the Old Testament, is this something that was purely for the purpose of setting Israel, that chosen people for God that we talked about, is this purely for the reason of setting them apart in the Old Testament? Or is this something that could possibly be applicable for all people for all time? Because that's a big hang-up for people, right? Oh, wait a second. I mean, some of those rules are just weird. Don't weave two different types of cloths together. How is that right and wrong, right? Don't eat shellfish. Well, don't eat shellfish just because it's gross. But besides that, I mean, is there a moral component to it? I mean, there are some things that you read in the Old Testament, you're like, whoa, this doesn't seem to apply. You might be right. Because there were certain types of laws, ceremonial laws, the Bible referred to them as, that were just for Israel. Because God wanted Israel to look so different from the rest of the world. And he had a very unique purpose for that. So be real about it. Ask the question when you're in the Old Testament. Or could this be something that is truly of a moral or spiritual nature that could apply to anyone for any time? Just ask the question. Just ask the question. But here's the second one. Again, this is going from minor to major here. If I come across a command in the Bible as I'm reading it that seems unfair or illegitimate, something that seems too judgmental, just something that seems that doesn't line up with how things really should work in the world, can I objectively stop and just think, right? Take away my feelings, take away everything I hear from other people. Can I just objectively stop and think, could God have had a reason for why he gave us this command? Could there be something here that in his wisdom and his sovereignty he knew would help protect us as we go through life, that would help bless us, that would help us be strong and healthy and have good relationships and ultimately honor him? Could there just be something there? And then finally, and I think this is the biggest one, as you go through the Bible, as you start to read, as you start to see little rules or commands pop up, whether it's from Jesus or you read it in Paul's letters or maybe you're digging around the Old Testament, whatever the case may be, is there a command God's putting before my eyes that I'm clearly not obeying? And therefore, I'm missing out on some sort of blessing for my life. The Bible says, with obedience always comes blessing. I'm not talking like a new Jaguar out front or millions of dollars in the bank. That's where our mind always goes with blessing. That's not what that means. But joy, peace, healthy relationships, God's wisdom that guides us. Is there some kind of blessing that I am missing out on in my life because I've just chosen not to obey something he's told me to do? Not for the sake of having a relationship with him. Not for the sake of being right before him. Not for the sake of knowing that I'll go to heaven someday. No, Jesus said, you're mine if you want to be mine. You're mine if you come. The Israelites, no different. You're my people already because I've chosen you to be my people. But the commands are a gift. And with the gift, when we take that gift and we open it up, we apply it to our lives, always comes a blessing. What command is it that I know I'm not obeying? I've just chosen not to, regardless of the reason. And I am missing out on the blessing that God has for me. Remember, if nothing else, know that God's commands, they're always confirmation to a relationship, never conditions for one. But also that those commands are gifts to be received. And when we start looking at the rules from that starting point, everything will change. And some of the things that we struggled with, some of the things that we fought back against, some of the things we just don't want to do because we don't like to be told what to do, they start to make sense. And we start to see how God wants to use these gifts to change us and help us become the people he wants us to be, to help us experience true life and freedom in this life. Let's pray. Jesus, God, in this moment, just because it's been so on my mind for the past few days and I've been so immersed in it, I can say thanks for the rules. But Father, if I'm real, if I'm honest before these folks this morning, I know that I can't always say that. Because God, sometimes I just don't want to do it your way. Sometimes it makes sense and I don't want to do it. Sometimes it doesn't make sense and I don't want to do it. Sometimes I just don't want to be told what to do. Sometimes I struggle with what everyone else is saying is okay, and yet you've said it's not okay. So God, I know, because you know, I struggle with the rules. But Father, help us this morning to change our thinking. God, help us this morning to see those commands that you've given to us as gifts to be received, not rules to be wrestled with. Help us to know if we're struggling with how do the rules really fit in, and am I really good enough, and could I really be accepted if I never get this stuff right? Help us to know that the answer is absolutely yes.